Hello, and welcome to Enhanced Information Solutions webinar on Paper to Pi. My name is Jack Audie. I'm EIS's Director of Sales and your host for today's webinar. This webinar is in fact being recorded, and the webinar recording will be provided to all registrants. The agenda is basically we're going to start off with a quick introduction. We're going to go through a poll. We're going to ask you all some questions. And then we're going to demonstrate eDatasheet, the eForms with workflow, and our Pi Event Frame Manager, and then go on to questions. Before we get started, here are some Zoom basics. To ask questions, please click on the Q&A icon. We will either answer your questions during the presentation or at the time at the end. At the end of the webinar, please take a survey that will be provided to you. It'll help us gauge the value of this webinar and see if this was hitting the mark for you all. All right, today's speakers. Bryce, can you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everyone. Bryce Lawrence. Thank you for coming, and I'll be walking you through a couple of the use cases we have here for Paper to Pi.
Okay, thanks, Bryce. And Kevin.
Hi, how are you doing? Kevin White, Operational Intelligence Consultant for EIS, and I'll be presenting some of these demos today as well. Looking forward to speaking with you.
Very good. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to launch a quick poll. If you would please take the poll. Thank you very much. So before we get started, who is Enhanced Information Solutions? Well, we were founded almost 30 years ago in Stillwater, Minnesota. We provide a lot of MES consulting, Pi services, SEEK, OT, cybersecurity. And we have three primary products: eDatasheet for manual entry to Pi, eForms OpsTrakker, it's a suite within OpsTrakker for electronic logbook and recording workflows, and Pi Event Frame Manager. Our locations, these are our actual offices. We're throughout the globe here, but we're actually spread out much further than this. We actually work, many of us work out of our homes and work on site. So we're in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Toronto, Canada. The offices are also in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Dublin, Ireland, Mannheim, Germany, Istanbul, Turkey, and Pune, India. So today we're going to talk about our Paper to Pi suite, and that includes eDatasheet, eForms with workflows launched from a Pi notification, and then Pi Event Frame Manager. Okay, Bryce, you want to talk about the problem statements?
So starting with eDatasheet, the idea of it is if you're writing down anything on paper, so this could be logs, for shift logs, this could be if you're doing rounds and walking around recording manual data, but it's how do we provide an easy way to get that data into Pi, have people be able to review it, be able to add comments. Okay. The next one we're going to go through is using eForms for corrective action. So a lot of times there's a procedure that needs to be followed if certain alarms get tripped or even certain events get tripped, like if it's a boiler trip potentially, anything like that. And then the idea is if you've got a paper procedure, how do you walk through that? How do you get that recorded and stored electronically? How do you make it readily available for an operator to get through so they're not searching for it and it's right at their fingertips and they're being led to it directly? Then the last use case is really tracking events. So an event could be something like you're manually charging a whey tank, you're doing a batch in a tank, you're sterilizing tank. It could even be an event where you're tracking like a downtime where you don't have a way to automatically pull that in. So you want to have this event frame exist in Pi, and you want to have some attributes around it and also be able to tie it to other process data. So how do you manually manage Pi event frames is what this is for. And so for all three of these, the architecture is centered around the OpsTrakker server. So the OpsTrakker server, that's the platform in which the modules run, which specifically we're going to concentrate on the eDatasheet module and the eForms module today. All of this uses SQL Server on the back end. So SQL Server both stores the data entered as well as stores the configuration for everything within the OpsTrakker suite. Then the communication out to Pi in this case is through the Pi Web API and into Pi. Now communications from OpsTrakker server can also be out to other web APIs, to other systems, and then as I mentioned, all the data you enter gets stored in SQL Server. And then everything is accessed via web clients, so strictly an HTML5 browser. So that's both for operator execution and also for configuration. Okay.
Bryce,
We
you're the
will
host
jump
now.
in. So as I mentioned, we'll start with eDatasheet. And it is again an HTML5 application, so there's nothing to download on the user's machines. You log into eDatasheet using your login, which can be tied to Active Directory, or it can be an individual login with that only exists within eDatasheet, and you can combine those two. So once you log in, this is built to be an enterprise application. So eDatasheet will allow you to pick the plant that you're going to connect to. It's not required to pick the plant. If you set a user to only have one single plant, then they'll automatically go to it. But in this case, if you're administrator level or something where you can pick multiple plants, and then once you pick the plant, the user gets access to any of the modules that are installed. So if you only have eDatasheets, that's all you'll see here. As you can see, it tells me up top who the user is, the plant we're connected to. The user also gets tracked as set to a default language. So that way, everything displayed to them can be in the language that makes sense for them. So in this case, we're going to select on eDatasheet. And the way Datasheet is set up is it uses equipment classes and then equipment instances. So if you look at this, I've got a couple of columns in here. I've got a couple of packaging lines, some reactors. So you define an equipment class and then you define the equipment in it. Now, when we say equipment class and equipment, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a strict S88 or S95 hierarchy. It's really however you want to define it. It's simply a way to organize the forms that make sense to you. So in this case, we're looking at a form which is automatically creating rows every 4 hours. So this is creating timestamps for the user. And in this case, it's not going to allow the user to change these. And you can change the view of how you're looking at it. So if I say, well, I actually want to just do 1 day, and let's just back up, or go for, actually, sorry, I'll go to today and then back up a day. So I can see here where data has been entered. I can, because it's backlit, I can see anything that hasn't been entered. And if I start typing in, so if you notice here, I forgot the decimal point. So I entered a large number, and this is expecting something 0 to 1. I'm not showing in this one, but we'll show ones where we are. So it's going to flag this in red. Now I can come back here and I can enter the decimal point because I haven't saved this out to pi yet. So it's simply going to show me now, okay, I'm back in range. You know, I can just tab over. I can enter in additional data if I can get my decimal point to work. And then I can save these all out to pi. So it'll pop up, it'll tell me the data is saved successfully. Now you have ways you can handle out of range data. So in this case, if I enter it out of range and I hit save, it's just going to tell me, nope, you can't do that. I'm going to only take a number 0 to 1. No matter what you do, I'm not going to let you save that because I know it can't possibly be outside that range. Now you can also set it at the form level to allow a user to enter it outside the range. It doesn't matter. Or you can have them enter it a comment if it is outside the range. So when you enter a comment, that is just right-clicking on the cell itself, and then I can hit add comment, and then I can type in the comment here and hit save. And then what will happen is you'll be able to see here that there's a comment. So then if another user comes in, they can edit the comment, they can see what's in it, add to it, etc. Now, all of the users, the security group that they're in determines whether they get to see the equipment, whether they get to see the forms. So that way you can segregate forms out if, you know, for example, you wanted to have somebody who's on the purchasing side and all they need to be able to do is enter in some values for, you know, receiving tank shipments or something like that. They could be limited to only their forms. So this way it's fit for the specific user. And all of these values here, you can choose value tag by tag. Do I want to write the value to pi, and what's the path? And that path is through the PyWeb API, so it can be either to an AF attribute or it can be directly to a pi tag. Or you can choose not to save the value to pi, so it'll only exist in the SQL Server for eDatasheet. And then the same thing is true in the comments. So you can choose to have a comment send out to pi as a string tag, or you can choose to simply save the comment only in SQL Server. So this was an example of a predetermined form where it's creating timestamps automatically. So if I jump over here to Reactor, so in this case, I've got a manual addition. So I don't know when the manual addition is going to happen. So I need the ability to just add it, and then I can come in here and edit this. So if I say, well, actually, this was at 8:30 this morning, and say, okay. Again, now I can see the limits here. So again, that's optional. And the other thing is you can have other data types. So any natural data type, so not an array or binary large object or anything like that, that Pi supports is allowable here. So I can have, if I want the operator to enter in text here, I can have in this case, this is actually a Boolean. So true or false, and then I can even have a timestamp. So if I want to enter, well, actually this was staged yesterday and it was done yesterday afternoon. That way I can enter all this, I can hit save. Now the other thing is with this, you can, as the forms are set up, you don't have to have the operator or the user enter every piece of data. So different people can come in, enter same different data. All this data is saved out to Pi with the timestamp here that's on the left. One other form just to show quick, because you can see how you can use drop downs. So in this case, this is just some statuses for if I'm looking at a packaging line. And then if I add something new, I can have drop downs. So all these drop downs are configurable, and everything within the eDatasheet is configurable. There is no writing code. Everything is selecting from list or typing things in. Absolutely nothing to, JavaScript, Python script, anything like that. And then you can choose tag by tag if you're going to have drop-down lists, and then the drop-down list can push out to Pi as an integer. So if you're saving out to a Pi digital set, or it can save out to Pi as a string. So real quick, let me grab. The other thing is you can have, because it is HTML5, I can embed it in directly into a Pi Vision display. So that way, like in this case, if I say I want to have tank monitoring and I want to be able to enter values and I want to be able to track them here, well, then I can go ahead and have the operator enter the value directly on the screen. Hit save, and then you'll see it'll save it out here, and then our trend will update as well. So again, this is just a standard HTML5 container, nothing to configure except the actual URL. As you can see, I changed the orientation of the form in this case, so I've actually got the values on the left and the timestamps as columns. Just you can reverse that, again, strictly at the form level. And then also, since some of you mentioned that you do care about having values being tracked in an audit trail, the way eDatasheet works is every value that's entered, obviously this is the timestamp, these are the timestamps being written to Pi, but it also keeps track of the timestamp of when somebody entered the value. And it'll, depending on how you set up the form, you can allow an operator to actually change a value after it's saved. But now the audit log is going to keep track of this. So we've got just a simple, this is a link out to the report itself. So if I look, I just want to look over the next few days and I'm going to look at this exact same report. And if I hit on the view report, scroll down, well, now I can see where values are entered, what the original value was, who did it at the time they actually did enter the value, and I can see if a value was changed as well. So that gives you complete control of being able to monitor who did what when. Now this is true both for every form data that's entered, and it's also true for the configuration itself. So you can tell if a form has been modified and who modified that form. Okay, so that's a quick tour on that.
Hey, Bryce, we have one quick question out here.
Sure.
Does eDatasheet currently support future data?
So this current release doesn't. We certainly can allow it. The next release will have it where you can enter it. Obviously, that assumes you've got your Pi tag set up to allow you to enter into a future timestamp.
Okay. All right.
And I'm going to turn it over to Kevin here. Kevin, you're on mute.
No, okay, we'll try it this way. So One thing that Bryce really brought up with eDatasheet that as an operations guy really resonates with me is that when I look at Pi, it's a great tool to use, but there's always been silos. There's already been data outside of that realm of digital information that I've always wanted to have my hands on. And eDatasheet allows me to break down one of those silos. If those have been logs before, if those have been turnover sheets, in those things, they were always in paper, which meant if I wanted to align them with what my operator was actually doing with the process variables, I had to integrate those. Once I have that data available, now I can use my Pi system to do some pretty cool analytics. So before I get into my demo, what I'd like to really bring up first is the why. Why are we doing this? Why are we going paper to Pi? And the real reason should be, hopefully for most of these projects, if you're in operations, for the operator. So what does the operator get out of going from paper to Pi? Well, the first thing is they don't have to do that integration across the silos because the silos have been digitized. One of the biggest being the one that you just saw Bryce put out with eDatasheets, taking in log forms. The other one that has always got me has been our procedures. So Pi does a really great job of taking all this data, allowing us an asset framework to synthesize it and come up with analysis. And as you can see from my screen, a great job of visualization in Pi Vision. The thing I can do with this is I can put specifications and tell you when something is in spec or out of spec. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trip this temperature alarm here. And let's think of an operator now who's maybe looking at this visualization screen and the temperature as they're going through looking at this hits high. Now, something that Pi allows you to do is check this number against a specification and therefore say, okay, well, this is what we want to do. It also allows you to visualize the issue. One way is in Pi Vision, we have conditional formatting. We can do things of that nature. Other thing we can actually do is send out notifications. So Pi notifications allow us to say, hey, we've looked at this data, we've come up with this information, something needs to happen, let's notify you. So two different pathways. But the gap that's always been in there is, okay, something's wrong, what do you want us to do about it? So this is how we're going to show you how we address that use case. So the first being, here's our notification, and you'll notice within the notification, standard stuff you'll see for a Pi alarm condition, what it was, what the violation was, but you'll notice here you'll see a URL. So imagine that you're a supervisor who gets notified, hey, this is out of spec. We know this is the procedure that should be done. Now, the interesting part is we could have always done that before where maybe we link to an SOP, a procedure of some sort that's static. What OpsTrakker eForms allows you to do is make that form dynamic. So let's go back to the operator station and say the operator sees this, sees there's a temperature out of spec and it's in progress. Notice over here, this workflow link. So now instead of just telling our operator, hey, something's wrong, you got to tell somebody, what should you do? They can click on this link and it will walk them through what they need to do. So in this scenario, we're doing very simple, hey, temperature's out of spec, go do something with it. But because like Bryce brought up, we can read and write from Pi Web API, I can now pull information in that will help me understand what the plant conditions are, so what steps I need to take. One of the important things about that is previously, it was a choose your own adventure. If you think about most of the procedures that we're doing on the floor, it's if this is the condition, do this step. If this is the condition, do this step. There's a lot of that analysis going on per step. And it's really a choose your own adventure style path for most of our troubleshooting, procedural operations, maintenance. However, what if we could use that real-time data from Pi, those process variables, where when we get to a step where we ask the operator, hey, evaluate this condition, instead we actually look at Pi and say, hey, Pi, what is this condition right now? So then instead of having an operator say, okay, I need to go path A or B, the system can automatically say, hey, path B is not applicable. Don't even worry about it. By removing those wrong paths on the choose your own adventure, we allow the operator to be backstopped. We kind of put bumper lanes up here. So this is the interface that the operator would see. Again, notice HTML5, everything that's been in here, like Bryce said, no programming. Drag and drop. I can promise you as an ops guy, I don't do programming. This is all so easy that you can set this up and easily train on it. The idea being replication and utilization for this, removing your paper procedures into a digital format. So you can see it pulls through the information and gives us an instruction to adjust the system as necessary to return temperature. You can imagine this would be more in depth based on what your temperature condition was, what actions needed to happen, how you had to go about doing this. This could be very complex. But in this scenario, we're just going to say, okay, you need to go adjust the system. So I'm going to pretend that I go out as an operator and I go out there and I notice that, yep, the probe's dirty. I clean the probe. We should be good to go. So as I go to save this, you'll notice that I've actually put a validation failure. What this means is when this number is pulled from Pi, it says, this is your set point. This is where you are. You cannot save this step unless you put a comment that you did something. The nice part about this configuration is that it allows you to change each of these drop-down menus to be whatever you want it to be. So these are also configurable. So as an operator, I'll say observation, and I'll say it's an equipment error. That's the reason we went high with this. We'll say the probe was dirty. And they cleaned the probe. So now I can save this. Again, the nice part is when I put these saves in, this is being captured by the system as I'm going through. So we'll use op user. So this is the operator who's doing this now. And I'm going to save that comment. And the thing about it is with these different configurations, you can choose who has to sign, when they have to sign, whether there has to be a backup to sign. Imagine a second check where as you're going through a step, you want a first person setting it up and a second person verifying. You can make 2 signatures per step. The other thing you can do with eForms is you can make it either a step lock or a form lock. What a form lock means is once Kevin White is in here in this procedure, no one else can come into it. Step lock means Kevin can be working on step 1. Someone else can just log in and work on step 2 or step 3. Think about a pre-valve lineup, something of that nature, where you have multiple individuals doing parts of a procedure that all needs to be completed before you can move forward. This allows multiple people to come on. So as I save this, it'll move me to my next step. In this scenario, we now need to have, wait a minute, did this happen correctly? So we're going to put in a comment here from the area manager that said, you know what, I'm gonna go one step further. We've seen this happen too many times, so I'm gonna put a work order in for this. And now I'm gonna save that entry for the work order. And here, again, as we talked about, you can change who is allowed permission to what. The other thing you can also change is what they have access to. So we'll put here, again, this will be for these signatures, you can assign it to the step of who is allowed to sign it and who is not. And lastly, let's say QA looked at this and said, you know what, everything looks good. I don't need to put a comment in. And I'm going to put QA user. And I'm going to save it. So what you'll see is that anytime I want to go back and see what other people entered, I can go back and see the other steps. I can actually go back and change those values if necessary. But what this allows me to do is track what is happening in this paper procedure previously, now digitally. So before where I would be, man, I hope that operator saw that alarm and took the right actions, and I'll find out the next day if that actually happened. Now I see in real time, as they're completing each step, as I see the process variables, as I see the system responding as I expect, all happening in real time. The other nice part about it is for visualization purposes, and we'll refresh this so they can go through a little faster. You'll also see that now the event frame will have, it's going to take one more second to write back through. Close this first. And what you'll get is you'll get the comments that come through after they're written to Pi Asset Framework. Maybe that's what I needed to refresh. And you'll see the comments in here for the event frame as they go through. So you've got the start time, the end time. These will still be written to Pi, so you can go back and look at these, and you'll see by the user who added these in for each of these. The idea being that now you've got a running log of these events, and you can actually go back to the workflow that was linked with it and see what was captured for those events. Okay, and so now I'm going to turn this back over to Bryce. He's got one more use case to show you. Bryce, you're on mute if you're talking right now, but we can see your screen.
Sorry about that. So in this case, I'm going to use Event Frame Manager in the context of a portable tank, or I'm going to run a manual batch, and I've only got local instrumentation. So I want to record the data with the batch. Now, Event Frame Manager allows you to start and end, as you can probably see here. Now, the other thing is it allows you to edit. So depending on time, we'll get into it, but the edit event frame is not dependent upon being an event frame that was manually started. You can edit event frames that were created by other, automatic triggers, etc. So if you need to change event frame attributes, if you need to change times, you want to in one event frame create another event frame. So if you're doing splitting or merging, so you can use a combination of the start and the end and edit with that. So typically what you might do is have the start and the end be at an operator level, and maybe the edit would be at a higher level, potentially an engineer. So the way it works is it's simply a URL. So it's going to pull, as you show here, I'm giving some information to the workflow. So again, it's going to use the eForms module of OpsTrakker. And when I click on the start batch, it's going to go ahead and pull up a workflow, which is going to allow me to manually set up an event frame. Now we've set this one up so that it has a mask on how I have to name the event frame. You can set this mask to be what you want. Don't have to use it if you want to have just strictly free form. So in this case, I am going to require B-3, 3 letters and then 2 numbers or 4 numbers. And if I try to go outside it, it'll tell me, nope, you got that wrong. And once I actually get it right, now it'll go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to default the start time right now because you just started it, and I'm going to default a description. You can change this. I can change the start time as well. So if I say, well, actually, I started this right at 9 o'clock. And that's when I want the start time to be. So I can say, okay. And then I can go ahead, hit save. Now, again, we've set this up with signatures. If you choose to have signatures on any step and how many signatures you choose to have in a step, completely configurable. So what it's done now, though, is I clicked on this, right? It ran this step, but I haven't actually sent anything out to the event frame. The other thing you notice is I did not assign it an end time. So it's set up so I can assign an end time at the same time as the start time. So if I've already finished this, or if this is something I'm actively working on, I can leave the end time blank. And then what'll happen is the details for both the event frame attributes and element attributes will be based on whether I'm starting or I'm ending it, or I'm both starting and ending. So it reads, in this case, it reads the event frame template to determine what attributes am I going to allow you to enter. So on the event frame attributes, it's looking for any attribute that has been marked as a manual data entry. So that's a property, standard property within AF, and it doesn't have a tag associated to it. So if I'm going to write to an event frame attribute, it can't have a tag associated to it. If I want to write to a tag, we'll show that in the element attributes, and then those can be referenced in the event frame. So in this case, you can see our extremely creative text that we put in here to describe the attributes. So obviously this one's a double, this is a Boolean. And then we can have a date time here. And then when I save this out, it's going to save this internally. In this case, it's going to ask for 2 signatures. And it is going to make me enter the password correctly. Wow. And then the next thing it's going to do is it's going to move on to the elements. So if you remember back on the graphic, there's values here that have been stored. So this is going to ask me to enter values for this TK101 element, which is what I had passed in for the event frame. Again, these are strictly pulled from the PyAF configuration. So it's looking for any element attribute that you've set the read-only flag to false. And again, you've identified in the properties as being manual data entry. So then it automatically pulls those in. It asks, it understands what the value is for them, what type of value, and then you can enter the data here. You notice there's this little scan. So if this was on a tablet, you could actually scan a value in if you were reading some barcode, right? If maybe it was a string and it wanted you to tell, you know, you're reading some filter that you're putting into the line or something like that. So again, I'm going to save this out. And as I mentioned, completely optional on what you want to do with the signatures. So now I've entered the data in, and what it's going to do is going to give it back to me. So it's going to show me, well, here's everything you said you're going to do. The reason we do this is because you do have the ability to go back into steps, assuming you've set up the security that way, so that you can change values. Because once I save this out, this will be the trigger. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and write the event frame with what you told me is here. So now it's going ahead and it's going to write out that event frame. Oops, I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong one. So if I come over here, you can see it changed my tank temperature. You can see it changed my pressure. You can see it did not change my weight because the weight is something I've determined. I don't want to enter the weight until I have the end. So you can see these have the value of the timestamp of exactly what I entered. And if I look in PyAF, I refresh this, there's the event frame that I just started. You'll notice this is on a central time zone as opposed to Eastern. So obviously it's going to display in the local time, but the event has not ended yet. So if I come back here and I go, okay, well, I want to end this batch now. So when I hit on the end event frame, I can select the event frame. And what it's going to do is it's going to give me a list of any event frames that do not have an end time. So this is going to be a shorter list. I can pick which one it is. You can see it's still got that information. Optionally at the form level, I could allow you to edit just about everything here. In this case, we chose not to. I am going to go ahead and set the end time though, and I'll just back it up a minute. It will not allow me to enter an end time that's before the start time, which I'm sure you would expect. And now I'm going to get a whole different set here, right? So now it's going to look through and it's going to say anything you've identified within the OpsTrakker configuration that allows you to, that tells you I want to have this attribute entered at the end of the event is how these are going to be. Now for the event frame attributes, they'll all end up at the same time, but the element attributes, as you'll see, they'll actually use the timestamp at the end of the event. Oops, sorry about that. Not paying attention. Oh, I hit caps lock. Now in the element, this is where I was talking about, so it's going to have the weight. It's also going to allow me, in this case, I just said, well, since it's portable, I don't know what necessarily the scale is going to be.
Hey, Bryce, real quick.
Yes. Yep.
The little hashtag next to the weight on that form that you were just on.
Yeah, that's the scan. I thought it's talked about that, but yep, that's the
That was
barcode
the
scan.
that I'm just reiterating someone that asked that.
Yep, that's the barcode scan. So if you're using a tablet, you can click on that, and then you could scan a barcode and pull the value that's being read off the barcode. I happen to be using a laptop, so unfortunately that's not real useful. And I can't type today. Okay, so again, now it's going to give me, it's going to tell me, so this in time is what it's going to write for my weight. And it's giving me that option to review again. So I'm going to just go ahead and say, yep, this is good. All right, and we had a fail with it, but I will go ahead and take a look at this just so you can see how this works. So this is the edit, and again, the edit is allowing me to pick any event frame. Now, obviously this list could get pretty long. So this way, if I do want to narrow it down, I can start typing here, right? So if I know I want to get to the demo ones that I did, so this is one I did earlier, and now it'll pull it in. So the edit event frame allows me to change just about everything. So I can change the name of the event frame, I can change the description, I can change start and end time. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and change the end time itself, say that it was right at 7:30. And then you can start walking through the exact same. Sorry. Exact same as before. So now the difference here is it's going to give me, you can see here, it's going to give me all of the event frame attributes because I've already got a beginning and an end to this, so I can edit all of them at once. I'm going to just go ahead and leave these just so I can show real quick. And then the same thing here, right? So now you can see I've got the weight, the humidity, the pressure, all that shows up as you want to edit an event frame. Now, again, the key with the edit event frame is it does not have to be something that was manually created. However, it is still going to use the triggers which say what values am I allowed to change based on the element, and it's something that was chosen for manual entry, and the same in the event frame attributes is something that was chosen for manual entry. Okay, I'm going to then pause here because I know we only got a few minutes left and want to make sure we can answer some questions. Jack, any questions?
One question came up. We have an audit trail for the event frame. Any modifications to the event frame as well?
Correct. So everything that I enter here, again, if I enter it through OpsTrakker, it ends up in SQL and it has an audit trail, who the user was, and the timestamp of the value they entered it, right? So yes, when I started the event frame, when I end the event frame, if I edit the event frame, all of that ends up in OpsTrakker and can be pulled out with a similar audit trail report as what I showed earlier.
Okay, another question is if the event frame was actually created, you touched on this, but if the event frame was created from a batch execution system, let's say Delta V batch, or some other batch execution system, can you edit event frames that were not manually created? They were created from another interface or event frame, or
Yes.
event frame.
Absolutely. And it may not have, depending on how the event frame attributes are set up, you may not be able to change those values, right? If they're tied to a pi tag. But one of the big things you can do with that is if you do need to change start time and end time, right? So that's where I was talking about. You could even, you can, if you need to, you could delete an event and then merge it into one by changing the end time, or you could, make this end time shorter and then create a new event and edit that. You could do that with the start event, right? So absolutely, you can go in and make changes to events that came from other systems.
Okay. Another question was, we had touched on this earlier, and this is back to eDatasheet. The filtered pull down lists. I know that's not currently available. When will that be made available?
Sure. So we're shooting for that as a hot fix here to be released in January. So that should have the ability to, as you saw the drop downs that I showed on the OEE, that'll give you that ability to pick a drop down value, and then the next one can be based on that value, right? So you could have a hierarchical list, right? So if I wanted to say, well, the first one was mechanical failure, and then because I picked mechanical failure, it gives me a list of, pump, agitator, other mechanical items, and if I pick that, then I can pick Y, whatever, if it was a blown gasket on the pump or something like that. So yes, that will be released in January.
Okay, great. And for eDatasheet again, same question, but around we're running disconnected.
Yep. So this release here is the disconnected. So we've got a couple of hot fixes coming out, and then a full release mid to late next year, which will have the being able to run disconnected. So that way you can download a forms onto a tablet, go out, make entries, and then come back and upload the what you entered.
Okay, great. And last question. I know we talked primarily about pi, and we touched on this early on, but just to reiterate, we show pi as the endpoint. Are there other endpoints available besides just pi? If I'm running, let's say, Canary or some other, or no other?
Yep. So currently it has, like I mentioned, it stores everything in SQL. So you certainly could pull information out of SQL or use the information in SQL. And then it has the ability to write out to any other REST APIs. So it would simply be a matter of we'd have to work that out with you, but absolutely, as long as it's a REST API, we can write to it and we can read from it.
And that includes like PyEdge, the edge data store.
It should be. Theoretically, it should work. We haven't actually set that up yet, but
Okay.
yeah, same concept, right? As long as there's a REST API.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that's it for the questions. All right, well, thank you very much. If anyone has any other questions, please reach out. Just send me an email, jack@eisinc.com. And please complete the survey at the end of this. And we will send a recording of this to everyone that registered for the webinar. Thank you very much. Have a good day.